Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this IT governance webinar on cyber defense in depth. It's the first of a series of webinars looking at, in a bit more detail, each of the stages of a concentric circle of defenses that all organizations need to be building in order to deal with today's complex and difficult cyber threat environment. IT governance as a company has been around for some 20 years or so. We were about 1,200 employees, about 12,000 clients across the world. We primarily deliver IT governance, risk and compliance solutions, so we're dealing with the people and process domains of cybersecurity rather than the technical security measures. And the businesses in the group cover the whole panoply of key areas and platforms so that you can deal with cybersecurity, information security, data privacy, incident response, business continuity in a completely integrated way across a series of different platforms and solutions, all of which put together helps organizations achieve a good governance, risk management and compliance framework. I'm Alan Calder. I've been at this for an awfully long time. I'm the chief executive of both IT governance and of its AIM-listed holding company, GRC Group International. And we set out to be, as GRC, the organization who focuses on helping organizations build genuine cyber defense in depth. I've written a bunch of books. If you get interested enough in them, you're welcome to get hold of them. They're in most good booksellers, obviously on our various websites. So please do use them. I'm going to talk today about where the threats are today, why cyber defense is at risk of being breached, how to detect and capture threats at an early stage in the process. If you can deal with many threats before they get anywhere near your crown jewels, you're better off than trying to recover when it's too late. Controls and measures your organization should implement, in particular regular vulnerability scanning and phishing awareness training can help you deal with the front line in terms of defense, and then some practical advice and solutions to enable you to deal with those effectively. So the World Economic Forum a bit earlier on this year said what for me is kind of an obvious thing, looking ahead to 2022, 23, that's the rest of this year, next year, cybersecurity must be seen as a strategic business issue that impacts decision-making. And when you look across the threat landscape, the organizational attack surface, the way in which the compliance landscape is changing to reflect both of those and what's happening on the supply side, it kind of bears out that top-level message. Ransomware will attack a device every 2 seconds by 2031, up from every 11 seconds last year. Cybercrime damages increasing by about 15% per annum to $10.5 trillion by 2025. It's up from $3 trillion back in 2015. So big changes in the threat landscape. You've got increasingly sophisticated cyber criminals, serious organized crime, often supported by or operating within a cover created by nation states. You've got cyber warfare, which is a kind of warfare that doesn't actually require to be declared. So unlike special military operations, which are not yet a war because nobody's declared war, cyber warfare is something that kicks off in advance of traditional war. Even non-traditional war takes place in the instances, and it's an issue for all organizations because cyber warfare has ripple effects which spread right the way across all other organizations which are connected into what's going on the web. Digitization, migration to cloud, accelerated massively by the pandemic across the industrialized world, has created a huge expansion in the attack surface. And that means there are even more weaknesses and vulnerabilities in technology, people, and process than there were 2 or 3 years ago. Internet of Things has added to that whether it's in at the simple level refrigerators, but at the more complex level webcams, motor cars, e-bikes, all which have some form of connectivity, all of them inadequately protected. And so you get criminals knowing that there are a lot of different ways they can get into the target end user market. Supply chain is a good route in. Managed service providers whose security is inadequate provide a way for an attacker to get at multiple end users by breaching one piece of software or one MSP. Imagine if a managed service provider who has, say, 1,000 desktop customers with tens of thousands of users gets breached and something goes out through their software update, which is corrupt. From an attacker's point of view, they reach a huge hinterland of systems which they can leverage. Many organizations' governance, risk management, and compliance around cybersecurity is bluntly inadequate, and you see the consequences of that in the newspapers, in the specialist journals, day in and day out. And as a result of that, the compliance landscape is changing. So we see data protection, privacy regulations like GDPR, and data protection is the other side of cybersecurity. If you have a cyber breach, it usually involves personal data. If there's a personal data breach, there's been some kind of breach of technical and operational measures. So data protection legislation, privacy rules, India is bringing in a new piece of legislation to deal with cybersecurity and privacy. Then there is legislation which focuses on specifically cybersecurity. So Network Information Security Directive across the European Union and the UK, the Central Infrastructure Security Agency in the United States, all focusing on very specific risks around technical cybersecurity in critical national infrastructure. And we're seeing a growing set of requirements around organizations reporting on cyber incidents. So GDPR already requires incidents to be reported to regulators where personal data is compromised. The SEC is finalizing a rule which will require organizations listed on the 3 SEC regulated stock exchanges in the US to not only report incidents within probably 72 hours of them occurring, report ransomware payments, but also to provide evidence disclosure around how the board governs cybersecurity, how the board makes sure that it's got effective measures in place, it's correctly directing management to deal with cybersecurity issues across the organization. And we'll see that proliferate across all organizations because of the size of the threat and the weaknesses in the attack surface. When you think about how you're going to deal with that, you look at the supply side of cybersecurity. Well, there's a global shortage of cybersecurity and data privacy professionals running somewhere in the order of 2.7 to 3 million people. The supply market is fragmented, lots and lots of small companies with different solutions which don't fit together, make it difficult as a buyer to work out how to find a staff awareness training product which works alongside a vulnerability assessment tool, which works alongside a governance framework. Lots of small single solution businesses, and of course cyber insurance is becoming much more expensive with ever fewer organizations prepared to provide cyber insurance. So significant changes happening in the market, and it's going to get worse very much more quickly because the market is responding all the time to very rapid evolution in the bad actor side of what's going on. Lloyd's of London just instructing members that any reinsurance policies from March 2023 will have to exclude damages arising from cyber war. Cyber war is a very grey area. Anything which involves nation state could be held to be cyber war, and that could mean that you'll be able to get cyber insurance, but actually when you need it most, it simply won't apply. So how are you going to demonstrate to clients, to stakeholders, that what you've got in place is adequate defense in depth if you can't point at a cyber insurance policy which you know will pay out when things go really pear-shaped? So it's going to be something that organizations have to do, and you have to do much sooner than spring of next year, because by March 31st, 1st of April, when cover is no longer going to be applied to cyber war, it's no good you then having to spend 6 months getting yourself into shape. You need to be in shape as quickly as you possibly can. So serious changes coming in organizational risk profile, and that's happening at the same time, as I said, that threat actors are becoming more and more sophisticated. So we're used to talking about non-target specific attacks. They look for vulnerabilities. So there's recently a company that was hit 3 times in a couple of hours. The first 2 attacks were by 2 different attackers focusing on the same vulnerability, came within 20 seconds of one another. The third attack was a repeat by the first organization a couple of hours later because they knew that there would be a different vulnerability they could exploit. This is becoming common. Attackers coming back, you pay the ransom, they come back 3 weeks later because they know that you haven't fixed the vulnerability. Attackers who take the money and release the data anyway. Remember that cyber attackers are scumbags. They're not people who are working to contracts. They're not working to any sense of honor. They're simply trying to leverage to the maximum possible the amount of money which they can extort from you. So it's non-target specific. If you're a larger organization, they might be focused on how do they breach your systems, serious organized crime. But on top of that, you've got to think about competitors. You've got to think about natural disasters. All of these are threats which can disrupt the day-to-day operation of your business, which increasingly, because of digitization and migration to cloud initiatives, means that you're very dependent on being able to operate in the digital domain. Attacks come through people, through processes, weaknesses in processes like you don't have a process around proper updating of passwords or password length or complexity, exploiting weaknesses in technology, vulnerabilities that are not patched, operating systems out of support. And the threats are hugely varied, whether it's malware, a web attack on your website, an attack on somebody arriving on a website. It's a man-in-the-middle attack, which places an attacker in the middle of an email conversation because the conversation is not encrypted. It's exploit kits or ransomware, which is downloaded onto a system. The quality of attacks is increasing all the time, particularly as threat actors specialize, so that you have some criminals who specialize in acquiring access to networks. They will sell that access on to affiliates who will deploy attack code. They will pay part of their winnings, if you like, to the people who created the attack code from them. So you get specialization inside the threat actor side of what's going on. Targets are intellectual property, payment card data, personal data, money, reputation. So, you know, the simple form of, hello, you've just joined the business, but I still need you to buy £5,000 worth of Amazon vouchers because I'm in this meeting. I haven't got time to do so. Would you rush out and do it? That type of email business compromise is as much of a attack on the integrity of a business. It's a very quick way for an organization of criminals to get £5,000 worth of Amazon vouchers, untraceable, do with what they like, as is intercepting a payment, as is getting you to pay a £10 million ransom. And the average ransom in health sector in America, for instance, now is $10 million. So what criminals are stealing is whatever they can monetize, whatever they can take from you and turn into something valuable that they can move around the world that's untraceable. So your typical cyber attack exploits internet-facing vulnerabilities, sends out an automated search, finds whatever the latest vulnerability is, or a vulnerability they know is not patched, or an attack which is designed to get people to share their authentication credentials, and either a vulnerability in your internet-facing software or a vulnerability in your internet-facing people. Something which pops up on the screen says, by the way, we're just about to log you out. You need to log back in, or you've just won a SMEG kettle, but you need to provide your details here to download. They're all mechanisms for getting people to provide authentication details. Frankly, once the attackers got that, they're in. They get into your machine, they download a piece of malware, or the malware then calls out to a command and control server which downloads ransomware, but They get inside your system, move laterally inside your network, find all the other data that there might be, find privileged access rights because maybe you don't tie down local administrator rights as tightly as you should do. They're not properly secure. These enable attackers to get into even more secure data, get to your crown jewels. They export that data. Your firewall's usually set to look for stuff coming in. It's not looking for data being exfiltrated. Maybe they then hide malware in your backup software, so when you restore, hey, they're still in there. And then they trigger the ransom demand. Typically, attackers have been inside the network for, on average, 150 to 170 days by the time they're discovered. So when you're trying to deal with this, you're in real trouble. It's not as simple as let's just stop it happening now, let's restore the system, because they're all over you. And quite often now we're seeing extortion being a triple extortion. So they say, you give us some money and we'll give you the ransom, we'll give you the lockdown keys back. By the way, if you don't want to release the data we've stolen, you need to give us some more money. And then they go into all the people whose data they've stolen from you, and they say, we've got your data, we shouldn't have. If you'd like to give us some money, well, then we won't sell it to one of the other criminals on the internet. So triple extortion, how to maximize return. So cyber attacks, very sophisticated. It's not surprising that the overall impact of cyber attacks has gone up financially as much as it has. It's not surprising that insurers want to take more action to limit their exposure to what it might cost them, not least because if you have an attack, you may well find that you have a GDPR breach, which you have to report, and the investigation might discover that you didn't have appropriate technical and organizational measures in place, so you get a fine on top of that. So how do you deal with that? You've got to build defense in depth. A simple single layer of defense just does not cut it. Today's cyber criminals are way too sophisticated. The attack is way too automated for you to assume that just doing one or two things is going to keep you safe. And your thinking around defense in depth has to, first of all, detect attacks. You have to build protection in against the attacks that get through that first layer of defense. You have to then think much more structurally around crown jewels, how you build and manage on a risk and reward basis defenses around those crown jewels. You have to think about how you're going to respond when your core defenses get beaten. And then you have to think about recovery, and particularly when recovery is when you might be thinking about cyber insurance. Cyber insurance, frankly, is only a mitigation to the expense of recovery. It's not a defense of its own. You should think about cyber defense as nothing else than a recovery mitigation. So layered defenses, putting layered defenses in place, mean that you can build the right combination of physical, technical, and administrative controls that help safeguard the organization, because more than one of those layers are unquestionably going to be breached. And ladies and gentlemen, it's entirely possible that as we go through this webinar, you'll find yourself with a growing number of questions. If you do, please use the GoToWebinar chat function or the Q&A function, which should be in your GoToWebinar panel. Put the question in there, and when we come to the Q&A session, which will be probably in about 15 minutes time, so 30 to 40 minutes into the webinar, then I'll pick up any questions that you've got, and I'll share the question and share the answer with you. So you're going to be breached. That's a racing certainty. Every organization is breached. Only a few make it into the press. There's half a dozen of them in the press every day. Yesterday, there was a hospital in the southeast of Paris breached, ransomware deployed, 10 million euro ransom demanded. Management of the hospital said, no, we're not paying. Paying ransoms is a bad thing. It just encourages you guys. So they're busy trying to work out how to get the system back up and running. They're turning patients away. Not a good thing for a hospital to be doing. Nurses are moving data around on paper, trying to access the data they need to manage patient care on paper. You can't get it on the system because the system's locked down. Just one of many examples. 66% of healthcare institutions in the United States in the last 12 months have had a cyber attack of one sort or another. It's a serious and major issue for all organizations today. So a brief look at the 5 stages of a defense in-depth array. Level 1, detect the attack. Your most vulnerable internet-facing resources are your software, your applications, your websites, your firewalls, your operating systems, email, and it's your people. Your attackers are looking to exploit vulnerabilities in one or other or both of those. Remember, your attacker needs to be successful one time. You need to be successful 100% of the time. You've got to stop 100% of the attacks which are coming thousands of times a day, and the attacker needs one attack to be successful. And mostly the technical defenses will work because you're operating an automated system which is programmed to identify and close down millions of identified and known vulnerabilities. The problem is there are some vulnerabilities which are not yet known. Some of them are known. The vendor develops a patch, you have to deploy it, but the attacker also knows what that vulnerability is because it's posted in a public website, and they can put together an attack quickly. If they've known about the vulnerability before it goes into a public website, they will already have made progress in crafting their attack. So you have attacks coming at you before you even know that you have a vulnerability. But still many organizations can deal with those. The ones who are alert, who have a continual vulnerability scanning and update process in place. And that's why so many attacks today are focused on individuals. It's much harder to program individuals as to what they should and shouldn't click on when they're dealing with what's on a website, what comes into the inbox, when they're working perhaps across multiple endpoint devices on a laptop, on a workstation, on an iPad or an iPhone, all of them linked into your corporate systems. So stage one, detect, means you need continual vulnerability scanning going on across your internet-facing resources, and you need ongoing anti-phishing training to make sure that your staff are thoroughly up to date. It's no good teaching them about phishing once a year, because what you taught them a year ago will be different in 3 years' time. On average, you need to run a refresher program for anti-phishing training on about a quarterly basis. I'll come back to that. Stage two, some attacks are going to get through. It can be a matter of seconds before an attack which is successful leads to the download of malware onto a system. So you need to make sure that you've got inside your organization people who are appropriately trained, and you've got instant response processes and cybersecurity controls that enable you to respond extremely quickly to those attacks which get through your first layer of defense. You need people trained to go, eek, I shouldn't have done that, not to hide it away for a couple of hours, but immediately to contact through whatever your design process is, a reporting process which can, a triage, which can escalate and triage attacks, which knows how to deal with cybersecurity breaches. You need robustness in your response mechanisms. That's all well and good. That's dealing at the front edge, your first two layers of defense. But how are you going to deal with the broader range of attacks which come at particularly your crown jewels? And the answer is that you need to do more than simply put in place these kind of level 1 and 2 basic protections. You need to identify what your core assets are. You need to work out what the impact on the organization of a compromise to their confidentiality, integrity, and availability will be. And you need to think about putting in place a program of controls which will enable you to apply appropriate mitigation to those risks which it's not in the organization's worthwhile, not worthwhile for the organization to take. Cybersecurity is an ongoing process. You need to be continually evaluating, maintaining, and revising what you have in place. Then at a strategic level, you've got to recognize that you're going to get infiltrated all the way through that. You're going to have attacks which come at you through the physical domain, through the digital domain, that come through the hardware, and you're going to need to have a way of dealing with those. You're going to have attacks coming through your supply chain. The impact on your organization could affect the whole organization. So you need to be thinking about business continuity. You need to be thinking about what you're doing in terms of your supply chain. How do you limit disruption and impact on the organization of a major breach? And then finally, of course, recovery. If it all goes wrong, how are you going to recover? Your business continuity plan enables you to keep operating. How do you get your systems back up and running, get back to business as usual? Business as usual is a stage beyond disaster recovery. That requires cost, That's typically where you turn to your cyber insurance policy and say, right, you need to help me pay for some of what I've had to deal with, but particularly pay for getting back to business as usual. Shouldn't be thinking about cyber insurance as doing anything other than that. So, more detail about detection. That's, after all, the purpose of this first webinar, is to look at the first layer of cyber defense. New vulnerabilities is covered every day, so you have to carry out regular vulnerability scanning. You won't know what your vulnerabilities are. You don't necessarily track in your own software unless you've got somebody scanning the CVE website. You don't necessarily go, hang on a minute, that CVE is going to affect my software. So what you need to be doing is scanning your software every day with a vulnerability scanner, which is regularly updated with all the information about new vulnerabilities, so that as quickly as is practically possible, you get a flag that says, actually, today you now have a vulnerability on this website. That means you can say, it's a minor thing, I'm not going to do anything about it. Actually, it's major. We're going to look at how we can patch it, or we can put some other mitigating control in place. So, key part of frontline defense, continual vulnerability scanning of all of your internet-facing assets. As I said, new technical vulnerabilities discovered every single day. If you look at the Checkpoint cybersecurity report, 75% of attacks used vulnerabilities that were more than 2 years old. So just worrying about what's going on your website today, you need to worry about what's been going on over 2 years. So again, continual vulnerability scanning is going to tell you that. It's going to give you every day, here is a vulnerability you thought you'd patched from 3 months ago, still not patched. It's a critical part of what you're doing. It's a flaw in software code. It's not a flaw which the developers put in there deliberately, but software code is complex. People ask more and more of it. It has to interact with more and more software. So flaws which didn't exist a year ago turn out to be a flaw later on, which is possible for a threat actor to take advantage of, to exploits to get inside the organization. Updates, reconfigurations can reintroduce previously patched vulnerabilities into your system. It can throw out a patch. Reconfiguration can mean that you missed that you dealt with a particular issue. Again, continual vulnerability scanning will help deal with that. So it's a critical component of dealing with today's 0-day, known about them for a week, known about them for 2 years, identifying in all your internet-facing assets what the vulnerabilities are so that you are aware of them and can deal with them. How do you deal with them? Well, you've got to deal with phishing, business and email compromise attacks, weak passwords, authentication attacks, malicious software, ransomware which is downloaded. Your patch management has to be effective. You've got cloud configuration vulnerabilities. The migration to cloud has meant that there are organizations with vulnerabilities they're not even aware of in their cloud infrastructure. You've got insider threats, malicious, and of course accidental. Many more are accidental than malicious, but they're just as big an issue. And insecure configurations in applications deployed across the network. So the combination of any of these, you might think that you're on top of patch management, but you've got weak passwords and you haven't trained people on how to recognize a business email compromise attack. And you're still going to get into serious trouble because on its own, patch management really up to date, just not enough. You need to have all of these areas covered in terms of how you're managing your vulnerability exposures. What I'm showing you here is the current CVSS score distribution for all vulnerabilities. So this is CVSS score on the CVSS website. It's publicly available data. You can check it out anytime for yourself. So you can see that at the bottom end, there's not many of the very minor vulnerabilities, sat in that between 0 and 1 score. The stuff that you should be worrying about is anything which is getting up into that 6, 7, 8, and 10 area. You see there are 20,000 known vulnerabilities, 11% of all vulnerabilities, which are in the 9 to 10, the seriously critical end. The weighted average is 6.5 on that score. So that says that known vulnerabilities, and you need to know which of those you might have in your software. You could have hundreds of them. Any penetration test which we do will typically identify between 5 and 50 vulnerabilities in a client website. maybe the bulk of those, 20 or 30 of them, might be minor, ranked somewhere between 1 and 3, but there will be a smaller number in the 3 to 5 area, and maybe 1 or 2 critical. And that's, most of our clients, remember, are governing cybersecurity. They're aware of it. That's why they're doing penetration tests. The reality for most organizations for whom a penetration test isn't a regular annual or biannual event is that things will be significantly worse. So 50% of internal-facing web application vulnerabilities are high risk. The web application, 4.6% of them are critical. 59% of vulnerabilities will lead to a PCI failure. So if you're processing payment card data, you've got failures in significant proportions of your scans, which makes you non-PCI compliant, which exposes you to fines. If you have a breach, it exposes you to significant recovery costs with the PCI Standards Council. So what is vulnerability scanning? It's an automated service. It's continual. It runs on a daily basis, whatever you set it for. You could have an authenticated scan or an unauthenticated scan. Most organizations will run unauthenticated scans, which is kind of mimicking the way attackers will be operating. They don't have authentication credentials. They hope to get them, but they don't have them. So it's unauthenticated scans that will be scanning your internet-facing assets, looking for known vulnerabilities. That'll tell you whether there is something that an attacker could exploit. It'll look for unpatched systems, misconfigurations. If you have assets you're concerned about, if you think you've got weak authentication processes, you could also run authenticated scans. Vulnerability scanning platform, IT Governance has one, is a platform which enables you to set these up, to download reports, to be clear about what's going on. And your vulnerability scan will look through open ports. It'll detect common services that are running on the port. It'll identify configuration issues. It'll look at whether you've updated services, you're running best practices, strong cipher suites. It'll then produce a report. It's quite a simple report. It simply says, here are vulnerabilities that have been identified. You can then go and tackle those vulnerabilities and typically patch them, upgrade systems. But it's a way to make sure on a regular basis that you are on top of internet-facing vulnerabilities. And that's cool. That's the security, the technical security side of your vulnerability environment. Then there's the human side. And as this cartoon kind of says, there's human beings inside the business. And however good we are at the technical side of security, everything automated, artificial intelligence perhaps, really terrific, there's a human being who's going to click on a link they shouldn't click on. I've been known to do it. You're going to do it. It happens. That's kind of how life is. So most malware finds its way onto networks via phishing attacks. Some malicious email, the link or attachment that downloads malware, sometimes even a piece of email that doesn't require you to click on anything. It just has to come into your email box and you look at it, and that enables it to get on with executing. So staff awareness training is how you deal with that. You have to teach staff how to recognize phishing emails, what to do if they click on one, if they click on a malicious link, and you have to update that. It's no good just doing it. Anti-money laundering training might say we can do that once a year. That's a compliance activity. Anti-phishing training is more than a compliance activity. It's a survival activity. It's a how do we make sure that our staff are aware of what's going on. And you need a phishing awareness program, which runs on whatever your staff awareness program LMS is, but which enables you, which updates on a quarterly basis, where the supplier is giving you new versions of whatever they're seeing, whatever they're picking up about, this is what scams currently look like. This is how they've morphed and changed in the last 3 months. Allied to that, you probably need some kind of monthly update, which is saying, breaking news, there's now this kind of time, this campaign gone live. Campaigns will go live on a mass basis across millions of websites suddenly over 24 hours, and you'll see a proliferation of, you've won this type of competition. You'll see a proliferation of, we tried to deliver to you with FedEx, and we need to upload your details in order for us to complete the delivery. You can't wait for the quarterly training update. You might need a monthly briefing that goes out to all staff and says, hey, hot news, this type of thing you need to worry about. So phishing emails, training staff, not just keeping them up to date, but if you're really serious, you're going to test their knowledge. And you test their knowledge by coming to a vendor who can, not just on an automated platform, because that's kind of relatively easy to use, but where you craft an attack that will ape current phishing attacks. And if you combine phishing staff awareness training on a daily basis with perhaps a phishing test run every 6 months, you will find that there will be people who've gone through training who are still clicking on links or opening emails which they shouldn't have. Of course, where they click through to will be a safe environment, because that's how the vendor will structure things. They'll give you a report. It enables you to focus on specific individuals or departments or teams where you need to do more work on training them and making sure they're aware of how they should be acting to protect the organization against the kinds of attacks that there are. So the train, fish, analyze, repeat cycle is a really good way to build resilience into the human part of the organization. Hey, the other thing you could do is disconnect completely from the outside world, have nothing arrive, don't even allow people to bring things on USB sticks, but then, hey, you're not in business, are you? So that doesn't work. The only way you can survive in today's digital online environment is to teach people and keep their knowledge up to date on how to identify and respond to phishing attacks. And this slide is a summary of exactly what I've said. So identify what staff need to learn. What's the sensitive information inside your organization that's going to be accessed by attackers? Think about the controls that you build around them. Think about how you're going to train your staff. And frankly, good off-the-shelf vendor programs are going to enable you 9 times out of 10 to deliver exactly what knowledge that your staff might need. If you're a large organization with significant assets, you might want to have that bespoke, custom built for you, but for many organizations, that's a very expensive route. The off-the-shelf route is the way to go. And then you want to measure effectiveness. You can measure effectiveness through talking to staff and saying, have you seen more? Have you dealt with more? You can measure it through repeated phishing tests and analyzing how the test results change out, what changes they show over a period of time. So, management commitment to a security awareness program, it's as important as management commitment to continual vulnerability monitoring. They are your front line of defense. They're the two things which, if you do, will significantly reduce the chance of you being breached. They won't eliminate it, but they'll just reduce the likelihood. Create and implement a strategy focused on improving and continually improving security awareness, and monitor, refresh, and build on that. So those are the two key elements of the first line of defense: detecting attacks, enabling your continual vulnerability scanning to find the vulnerabilities that will deal with those, enabling staff to identify the attacks that will penetrate your network so that you are in a position to deal with them effectively. Threat detection, robust security practices, don't punish staff for falling victim. You have to have a positive security culture. People are going to fall victim. People are going to get caught. What you want them to do is to report incidents fast. So encourage them to do that. Recognize that people get breached, that the chief executive gets breached. She should say so. It helps people recognize this happens. Shouldn't happen, but I reported it. Social engineering attacks take advantage of human weakness. They happen all the time. Share information about them. There are videos on YouTube that you can share. You can test people. People will give over data they shouldn't because they like to do what they're told to do. Regular staff awareness and testing. Those are the core components of effective threat detection. And of course, IT governance will help with both of those key areas. We have a vulnerability scanning, a continual vulnerability scanning solution, which enables you to identify and flag vulnerabilities on your internet-facing assets. You can buy it by batch of 4 IP addresses. If you're scanning your website and it doesn't detect any vulnerabilities, it will place a scan by IT governance badge on the website, which is another way of flagging to customers and stakeholders that your website is scanned and currently secure. It'll keep that up to date. Our phishing awareness program is exactly as I've described it. It has a quarterly update. Our instructional designers collect data from around our experience and that of customers, so we know what's going on in terms of latest attacks. Those go into our phishing awareness updates. There's a monthly bulletin that goes out with no ad marketing, and it's just a straightforward knowledge bulletin that goes to everybody on our learning management system that tells you here's something else you need to be aware of around phishing or cybersecurity, all as part of the ongoing subscription service. They're both obviously subscription services. You can buy them and forget about them. They'll automatically renew as and when you need them to. You can add people, you can add IP addresses, you can modify and address as you need to go. But they are fundamental to building effective cybersecurity. We've also got, and we'll talk about this multiple times, what you might think of as cyber defense in depth in a package. Cyber Safeguard is a combination of services and cyber insurance that we put together, where the cyber insurance is embedded in the offering. If you go to our website, and we'll circulate the slides after this webinar to everybody who's been on it, it brings with it between 100 and 500,000 pounds worth of embedded cyber security cover. You don't have to fill in any additional questionnaires. You simply sign up for the bronze level, which is 100,000 pounds worth of cover. You need to be committed to applying the basic cybersecurity rules in the National Cybersecurity Centre rulebook. You can download that from our website. For £250,000 worth of cover, you in addition need to be Cyber Essentials certified, and you need to deploy some training. You need to deploy vulnerability scanning. And for the £500,000, you need to do that. There's additional training, obviously phishing training, vulnerability scanning, all of that you need to be doing. There is a couple of other elements built into that around breach reporting, access to our breach reporting service, access to our cyber assessors on an email basis. So it's a good package of support, training, testing, and insurance cover, which enables mostly small and medium businesses to get a really sensible level of cover in place simply by signing up to one subscription service and getting on with it. If you already have Cyber Essentials or Cyber Essentials Plus, very straightforward to do. If you're just starting on that, equally straightforward to do. So I'd encourage you to go look at Cyber Safeguard. There's a click-through link on our website, or you can just type Cyber Safeguard in on our website and take you directly to the product. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of what I'm planning to say to you today. I'm going to turn in a moment to questions if anybody has any. But I just want to say that we'll be looking at each of the other layers in more depth over the course of the weeks and months ahead. So if you haven't signed up for those webinars, please, you are welcome to do so. So let me just have a look in chat. If you have any questions, please, the chat function, which is on the in the GoToWebinar screen, you can type in any questions that you've got there. And I'll pick them up and answer them. There's a Q&A function which you can access through the control panel. Please do feel free to use that as well. I prefer the chat function. And the only question which I'm seeing at the moment is how easy is it to initiate the Cyber Safeguard service? The answer is at the bronze level. All you have to do is buy it and commit to applying the NCSC basic cybersecurity practices. You can't claim until they're in place, but they're very straightforward to put in place. So it could be as quick as it could be in place by as cover 5 minutes later, depending on what controls you've got in place. Cyber Essentials, Cyber Safe, Cyber Essentials Plus, slightly longer to put in place. If you already have Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus, then signing up to Cyber Safeguard is as quick as it takes you to execute on the website, because the cover comes into place on the basis that you've got a valid certificate and that you are going to do the staff training and vulnerability scanning that is required. So you can have access to cyber insurance immediately that you sign up. Folks, that looks as though that's the last of the questions which I've got, unless there's anything else which I've missed. And so, ladies and gentlemen, in that case, I'd just like to say a big thank you to you all for coming on the webinar today. I hope it's been useful. As I say, we will be repeating. You can get onto any of our websites. There's a whole bunch of ways you can contact us, look at the content on our websites, make free use of that. Hope it's been useful. If we can help any of you, please take advantage of that. Please, if you'd like to come back to a future webinar, we'd look forward to doing that with you. I hope you all have a successful Thursday. Stay cyber safe and secure. Bye-bye.